So, Rucker, I've lost track of who the White House counsel is, but is there any concern that if anyone that works for the president there we go, the impeachment guy. Is there anyone on the staff that repeated today what Donald Trump said yesterday, which was a call for, I think the president's statements were felon. I mean, I think it's a felony to call for illegal voting. And then if any of his supporters who heard that or who saw it on television were to go out and deliberately vote twice, they would be committing felony voter fraud, the kind that Bill Barr said in an interview he hasn't seen any of. So tell me if that claim was repeated, if the campaign operationalized it, if Donald Trump said the quiet part out loud, as your colleague Ashley Parker often says, or if that was, I mean, how are they describing or explaining, or in the case of this White House, it's usually doubling down on what the president did yesterday, which is criminal?
Well, Nicolle, you're right that it's criminal to vote twice. And you're also right that Ashley Parker is correct in this case, as she always is. You know, this is Donald Trump saying the quiet part out loud. He made this comment publicly. You know, there's been no effort by the White House to apologize on his behalf or to say he was wrong. But I've also not seen the White House amplifying the president's call yesterday. And jump in here if somehow they have, and I've missed it today, but not in my reporting at least.
You know, I want to turn to what Joe Biden said on the tape we just played, Michael Steele, because it reminded me of a moment. I was standing about, I don't know, 20 feet away from John McCain when he jumped in when one of his supporters called then Senator Obama a Muslim. And John McCain jumped in and said, no. He loves America. We disagree on policy. I thought that what Joe Biden did today sort of cut right to the bone in the way that that moment did when he said, I was wrong. I thought hate was dead. I thought we'd stamped it out. And that may have been informed by 8 years of President Obama. I'm not sure what gave him that optimistic view, but he said, I was wrong. And what I see happening in this country is when you have one of the most powerful politician in the land fanning the flames, it comes out from under the rocks. He's making, this week, I think, has been a turning point in the Biden candidacy. He's on the offense on issues of justice and law and order, frankly, with that speech Monday. He's in Kenosha today. He gave a speech yesterday about school reopenings in the time of a pandemic, something on the mind of every American family. And then today, to sort of make that profound observation that hate's always been there, but the reason it seems to be sort of coursing through the body politic is because of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think that's right, Nicolle. He started to frame this narrative that we're in right now in a very personal way, in a very particular way that we've not seen nor heard from Donald Trump, nor should we ever expect to see or hear from Donald Trump. Donald Trump thinks the way he wins is through two things: intimidation, fear, and law and order. In other words, we'll drum up the fear and then talk about law and order, and we'll drum up the law and order to push more of the fear and intimidation. So you have that going on. Meanwhile, the people who are actually feeling stuff out here, right? I mean, this stuff is not happening in a vacuum. The people are not looking at this antiseptically. They're actually feeling the pain of watching Mr. Blake get shot and to see the response by the country's leader. So what you have with Joe Biden is an acknowledgement that, yeah, like a lot of us out here, I got this one wrong. I thought that we really were past hate. We watched the marches. We watched the water hosing of black men and women. We watched the dogs go after them. We saw the resegregation of their communities and the redlining of their communities. And we know that the systemic issues around race, we thought we had pretty much turned that corner until Charlottesville, until shithole countries, until the shooting of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and how this process is now unfolding for countless Americans. And he admitted that. And I think it's refreshing to hear someone say, yeah, you know what, we aren't there yet. And it's going to take a great work to get us there. But what this guy's doing, that's not how it's going to happen. What he's selling, that's not America. That's not the compassion that I know each one of us has. And so when you layer on top of that the story of the private moment that he had with the family, with you know, all of that pain, and acknowledging that in a real sense. And I'll say this on behalf of the country, because it hasn't happened with the president. I think could be a very important turning point. How we absorb that remains to be seen. But for the Biden campaign, I think they got him on a good footing to now go out and talk a little bit more in that space.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.